Hello everyone, I am Professor Amit Vyas, Computer IT Department from Dr. Subhash Technical Campus. Today we are discuss about the topic of encoding and modulation. So in the previous lecture we are discuss about what is the fading and what is the factors we are affected in the fading and the types of fading. It means the multiple path propagation, the speed of the mobile and speed of surrounding object and transmission bandwidth of the signal, and we can show also the flat fading and fast fading. So we can discuss about the many more what is the fadings and how can you affect in the data transmission or the propagation mode in the object we are transmitted the data or any other signal. That times the fading is occupied or some problems is occupied. Now we can show about what is the encoding and modulation. For the digital signal, the data source which may be either digital or analog, it is encoded in the digital signal x of t. So in the real world, the data will be go to the either digital mode or analog mode. So you can show about what is the digital signal and what is the analog signal. Actually it depends upon the encoding techniques. For the analog signal is continue constant, a frequency sign is known as the carry signal. The data can be transmitted using the carrier signal by modulation. So analog signal is continue constant based on the frequency signal. So we can show the next. In the what is the modulation? The modulation is a process of the encoding source data onto the carry signal with the frequency. So what is the modulation? It is the process of the encoding source data onto the carry into the frequency. And then next we can show the frequency of the carry signal choose to be compatible with the transmission medium being used. According to the input source, the signal is either analog or digital, which is called the baseband signal, and the carrier signal will be modulated into the modulation signal. So what is the modulation? Modulation is process of the encoding to be source data into the carry signal into the frequency. Also source signal is either analog or digital. It is depends and carry the signal we can modulate into the modulate signal. So we can show modulation techniques is involve the operation of one and more three parameters: amplitude, frequency and phase. So we can show that the modulation is dependent amplitude, frequency and phase. Now we can show the different types of encoding techniques which are available: digital to analog, analog to analog and analog to digital. So these are the many different techniques of the encoding. So we can show the digital to analog for the different mapping encoding techniques. So the digital data and digital signal must be converted to the analog signal for the wireless medium. So what is the digital to analog? The digital data signal must be converted the analog signal for the wireless transmission. It is called the digital to analog. So this is the digital to analog transmission. Optical system and unguided media only propagate the analog signal. So optical system and unguided media. First of all, what is the unguided media? The medium which are you can transmit it for the wireless medium, it is called the unguided media. So you can show that the unguided media, it is the wireless system in the data transmission. So digital to analog is converted. Optical system and unguided media only propagate the analog signal. So we can show that the next analog to analog. The baseband analog signal such voice, video must be modulated onto the high frequency carrier for the transmission. So what is the baseband? The baseband is a easy and cheap. For example, voice telephone line or voice signal are transmitted over the telephonic line in the original factor. So what is the analog to analog? आप कोई वॉइस सिग्नल टेलीफोन लाइन में से ट्रांसमिट कर रहे हो और वो सेम टेलीफोन लाइन में ही सिग्नल रिसीव कर रहा है जो एनालॉग टू एनालॉग है। जैसे कि आप BSNL लैंडलाइन कनेक्शन होता है, तो इसमें क्या होता है कि आपका सिग्नल है वो एनालॉग है और रिसीविंग के जो केबल में ट्रांसमिट हो रहा है उसके साथ ही आप रिसीविंग में भी एनालॉग सिग्नल ही यूज कर रहे हो। सो टेलीफोन लाइन दे आर original spectrum. It is called the analog to analog transmission. Now we can show analog to digital transmission. Conversion of analog data to the digital form permit the module digital transmission and switching. So what is the analog to digital? Conversion of analog data, for example voice and video, into the digital form. So data is transmitted from analog to digital for any voice or any video. So this is the transmission. It is called analog to digital. It is a common to digitalize the voice signal prior to the transmission, either guided or unguided feedback, to improve the quality and advantage of TDM स्कीम। इसमें क्या होता है कि आप कोई भी डेटा गाइडेड में सेंड कर रहे हो या अनगाइडेड में, इसमें डेटा क्वालिटी इंप्रूव होने का बहुत बड़ा एडवांटेज है टाइम डिवीजन मल्टीप्लिकेशन। बिकॉज ऑफ योर डेटा वी कैन सेंड द TDM बेस, इट मीन्स टाइम डिवीजन मल्टीप्लेक्स। सो दिस इज कॉल्ड द एनालॉग टू डिजिटल ट्रांसमिशन. So we have discussed about what is the analog to digital, and we can show what is the encoding and decoding modulation. Now we can show about different types of encoding: digital to analog, analog to analog, and analog to digital. So this is the basic of the modulation. Now we can show about the signal encoding criteria. So first we can show signal spectrum. So what is the signal spectrum is dependent. The bandwidth is required for the given data rate. It is called the signal spectrum. तो सिग्नल किस पर डिपेंड होगा? बैंडविड्थ के ऊपर, और बैंडविड्थ डिपेंड होगी कि आप डेटा रेट आपका क्या है, आपके स्पीड क्या है, उसी तरह से आपका सिग्नल ट्रांसमिट होगा। सो आपका डेटा रेट ज़्यादा होगा तो आप बैंडविड्थ आपकी ज़्यादा होगी, और डेटा रेट की स्पीड ज़्यादा होने से आप सिग्नल को काफ़ी दूर तक और स्पीड में सेंड कर पाओगे। Now next we can show about what is the clocking. The receiver must be determined beginning and end of the each bit. Need to the synchronize transmitter and receiver. Use the external clock, which is expensive. The synchronization mechanism based on the transmitted signal. So next we can show criteria is clocking. Clocking is determined the receiver and transmitter and also in the synchronized mechanism. Then next we can show signal interference of the noise immunity. Some code are better than the other. It is a preference of the noise. Performance is usually expressed in the terms of BER. सिग्नल में क्या होता है कि कुछ बार आपको नॉइस की इश्यू आ जाएगी, तो वो डिपेंडेंट होगा कि आप किस तरह से सिग्नल को यूज़ कर रहे हो, बैंडविड्थ आपकी क्या है। तो उसमें जो भी नॉइस आएगा तो आपके डेटा रेट और फ्रीक्वेंसी हाई होगी तो नॉइस निग्लेजिबल की तरह होगा, उसके आप काउंट नहीं कर पाओगे और इसकी कोई इफेक्ट आपके सिग्नल में नहीं आएगी। सो दिस इज द सिग्नल encoding criteria. Now we can show the digital data and analog signal. To the transmitting the digital data using analog signal. Most of familiar use the transformation in the public telephonic system. The mostly transmission we can occupy the public telephone system, designed to be transmitted analog signal into the 300 Hz to the 3400 Hz. Use the modem for the digital data to analog and also be used analog data to digital mode. It means we can use the modulator and demodulator for the data transmitter and receiver. Also you can use for the receiver and transmitter. So the digital data and analog signal mostly used for the digital data and analog signal for the modulation and demodulation. Modulation is involved the operation on one or more three characteristics for the carrier signal. The modulation is dependence of three characteristics of the carrier signal. So which characteristic is dependent? We can show digital to analog conservation is dependent of amplitude shift key, frequency shift key and phase shift key. So this is the three digital to analog dependence on the conservation. So now also we are convert and use for quantitude amplitude modulation. Now we can show amplitude shift key, then after we can show frequency shift key and last we can show phase shift key. So what is the amplitude shift key? In amplitude shift key is a types of amplitude modulation which is represent the binary data in form of the variation in the amplitude of signal. तो amplitude shift key क्या होता है? It is the represent of the binary data for the variety of the signal. तो signal को represent करेगा binary data से. Any modulate signal is a high frequency carrier. The binary signal when amplitude shift key modulate is given the zero value for the low input and given the carry is a higher input. तो इसमें क्या होगा कि एम्पलीट्यूड शिफ्ट की किस तरह से आएगी आप देख सकोगे. दिस इज द एम्पलीट्यूड शिफ्ट की आप देख सको. दिस इज द वन सिग्नल. सो 1 is occupied for the higher module and 0 is occupied for the low module. So this is the signals. You can show that this is the signals for the carrier signals is represented and this is the data signal. It is the 1 for the higher wave and 0 for the low wave. So this is the carrier signal you can represent. Then this is the signals or this is the modulate signal if the signal is go to the low wave. So if you go to the higher wave then you modulate the signal, otherwise is straightforward. Now we can show this is the low is a 0 and high is a 1. So this is the amplitude shift key. The following figure is represent the amplitude shift key. So this is the figure is represent amplitude shift key. You can show that here. This is the figure. Both frequency and phase is remaining constant while amplitude is changed when the amplitude is 0. So we can show that the frequency and phase is constant. You can show that here. It is the 1, then frequency is also we can no change. Otherwise you can check that it is the change. Insufficient because of the 1200 bps voice grade line. So this is the insufficient because of we can use the 1200 bps for the voice grade line. So what is the use? The application is ASK is used to transmit the digital data for the optical fiber. So this is the use. It is used for the transmit the data into the optical fiber. So this is the oscillator for the data transmission. You can show that amplitude shift key modulator block diagram is comprised of the carrier signal which is generate the binary sequence from the message signal, and the base limit is a filter. So you can show that this is one signals and we can generate the binary signal. You can show that this is the signals, and above diagrams is a ASK modulator. So this is the diagrams for the ASK modulator. You can show that here. Now next we can discuss about the frequency shift key. Frequency shifting is a digital modulation techniques which is the frequency of the carried the signal where according to the digital signal changes. The most common for the FSK is binary frequency key. Also it is called the binary frequency key shifting key. So FSK is scheme of the frequency modulation. We can show. So what is the frequency shifting key? So this is, you can show that here. This is the modulation of the frequency. Also we can change. This is the regular modulation of the frequency. If the modulation is not for any positive, negative or regular mode, you can show this is the one types of signal. If your modulation is go to the any frequency wave, so you can go to the, this is the same frequency. You can start here. This is the one cycle you have contemplated and the frequency is the same. Or you can say that this is the one positive and one negative, two positive, two negative. So this is the one same frequency modulation is occupying the signal. It is called the frequency shifting. So frequency is shifted based on the signal which is positive and negative. The output of FSK modulate wave is a high in the frequency for the binary high input and the low frequency for the binary low input. You can show that this is the high for the binary high and this is the low for the low input. The binary, it is also in the mark and space frequency. So you can show that here also is occupy some space here. So this is the high and low frequency. Same, this is the represent of the image is represent of the diagrammatically represent of the FSK module for the waveform in the analog with the input. So you can also be represent the waveform. So this is the continue waveform. It is represent, and this is the represent also be continue waveform. This is represent waveform for positive also, and you can merge, and you can some negative, and then this is the merge and you can positive. So this is the frequency modulation. This is the what is the application. It is used for the voice line and high frequency radio transmission. So this is frequency mostly used for the radio transmission, but mostly it is denoted by the frequency modulation. If the frequency is positive, go to the 1, and negative you go to the 0. So now last we can show about the phase shifting key. The phase shifting is a digital modulation techniques which is the phase of the carrier signal in the change by the variety sine and cosine input in the particular time. So signal, so what is the phase shifting key for the signal? The signal which are represent for the sine wave and cosine wave in the particular timeline. Phase shift key is a widely used for the wireless LAN, biometric, contactless operation along with the RFID and Bluetooth communication. So this is the shifting is a mostly used for the very wide area network, mostly in the wireless LAN, biometrics and RFID modulation and Bluetooth communication. But mostly wavelength is occupied sine wave and cosine wave input in the particular time. So we can show that here different types of binary phase, but we can show the peak amplitude and frequency remaining constant during the interval time. The most efficient use of the bandwidth is a high data rate is possible compared to the frequency shift key. Here we can use high data rate compared to the frequency shift key. Now phase shift key is a two types depending upon the phases signal gate can shifted. So what is the phase shifting key? Mostly phase shifting key is a two dependence on the two wave, sine wave and cosine wave, and next it is used for the biometric Bluetooth communication, and also the frequency of the bandwidth is a high compared to the frequency shift key. It means phase shift key frequency high compared to the frequency shift key. Now the phase shift key have two types. First is a binary phase shift key and second is a quadrilateral shift key. This is the phase shifting for the different techniques. Now we can show the first technique. This is the also called the two phase PSK, phase reversal key. In this technique is a sine wave is carrying the two phase 0 and 180. So binary phase shifting is occupied two wave 0 or 180. The binary phase shifting key is basically double side bandwidth suspended carry modulation scheme for the message begin digital information. So this is the binary shift key. Now quadrilateral phase shifting key. This is the phase shifting key techniques which is the sine wave is carrying the four phase. Here binary is having two phase 0 and 180, and here four phase 0, 90, 180 and 270. This is kind of techniques are future extended PSK can be done by 8 and 16 value, also depend upon the requirement. So this is the signal for the positive and also go to the negative way. Also go to the positive and negative. This diagram of the binary phasing key is consistent of the balanced modulator which is carry the wave input and binary sequence other input. So this is the oscillator and this is the represent of the binary signal and multiplier. This is the one positive way, this is the negative, this is the positive way, this is the negative. So this is the represent of the modulation signal for the any particular phase shifting key. Now we are discuss about in the analog to digital, all the amplitude, frequency and phase. Now we can discuss the digital to analog, analog to digital and analog to digital and digital to digital. Now we can show the signal encoding. What is the dependence upon the encoding criteria is the spectrum. It means the bandwidth is dependent, and what is the interface of the signal. The interface is occupied and noise is dependent. Then we can show the digital data to analog signal. We can show the three types: the digital to analog conservation, amplitude shift key, frequency shift key and phase shift key. Now we can show what is the amplitude. Amplitude is dependent on the data. We can positive way and negative way. Positive is represent 1 and 0, but the most of the amplitude shifting key, it is the binary representation, also be used for the transmitted for the optical fiber in the communication. Now we can show the frequency shift key. Frequency is depending for the binary shifting key for the modulation. We can show here also. If the frequency is high, then data transmission speed is very high. So this is the also dependence. The frequency is low, then the data transmission speed is very low. So this is the also be dependency. So frequency modulation, this is the important task of the signal. So also be the bandwidth is the importance of the any signal, because of the transmitter and receiver is dependent upon the frequency modulation. So the transmitter frequency is high and receiver frequency is low. That time signal is not received a particular time duration, so also be occupy some noise or some data rate is low, then signal is not received in the particular channel or any time duration. So this is the important for the frequencies and phase shift key. So what is the use of the frequency modulation? The frequency mostly used for the radio for the transmission. So radio data transmission mostly use the frequency shift key. In frequency shift key we can show the radio transmission. So in the transmission is occupied for the wireless medium. So in the wireless medium mostly for the unguided media. So you can know that what is the unguided media. The data we are transferring for the wireless medium, it is called the unguided media. So data we can transmit it some radio wave, also line of sight or any other modulation or sky wave, it is called the wireless medium or unguided method. So this is the importance for the frequency modulation for the data transmission. Now we can show the phase shifting key. Phase shifting is mostly represent sine wave and cosine wave. And what is the phase shifting mostly used? Mostly used for the wireless LAN, biometric for the representation. So what is the biometric? You can show the any fingerprints or any security password or data protection, your thumb or eyes scanning. So this is the importance for the modulation, because your retina scanning or biometric scanning, your all the parts which are scanned and data which is saved based on the image form, also the represent in the frequency modulation based on the sine and cosine wave. So this is the importance for the phase frequency key. Also be used the Bluetooth communication. The phase is represent the binary and quadrature phase shifting key. So binary is represent two wave for the 0 and 180, and quadrature is represent the 4 wave for the 0, 90, 180 and 270. So this is the frequency shifting modulation techniques which is represent of the carrier, signal and modulation. So this is the all the encoding techniques which we are refer. We can show that here. Previously we can refer the what is the fading and the what is the effect of the fading and the speed and the mobile communication, then transmission media and the bandwidth of the signal which is dependent on the frequency. Also we can show how can you affect the fading. The data transmission is occupied from one to another. That time the noise or signal which are reflected for the any particular object, that time the fading is occurrence. So we can also be show what is the flat fading and fast fading. Also we can show the what is the reflection, and here we can discuss about what is the encoding and modulation. So this is the all the modulation techniques we can discuss, and this is the main three parameters in the part of the modulation. First is amplitude, second is frequency, and third is phase. So this is the main three different parameters, and modulation techniques is depend of the signal. If the any signal is amplitude is high, then effect is occupied. If the frequency is low, then problems is occupied. Then phase, it means the which is the binary or any other phase. So this is the problems is occupied. So modulation techniques or modulation is the importance for the data transmission. So now we can discuss about all the modulation for the digital to analog. So thank you all of you.